A 6-year-old girl finds a wounded sparrow in the woods, vows to save it, and the bird talks back. It tells her she's a witch. But a gathering of birds in the forest won't accept her unless she can answer one question. Is a tree red? She can't. The penalty for failing is losing the only thing that made her special, the ability to understand animals. 3,000 miles away, a bullied 12-year-old builds a 2-second time machine in his closet, just enough to dodge a punch, not enough to fix a life. He runs away to see a rocket launch, is adopted by a gang of MIT engineers, and discovers he might have a future after all. At a mall, not far from their school, an assassin notices both of them. Has had a vision of a war between magic and science with these two at the center, and he decides to kill them before they grow up. That's the triangle Charlie Jane Anders sets up in All the Birds in the Sky. The engine that drives it is simpler than it sounds, a question nobody can answer and what it costs to stop trying to be certain. Patricia will spend decades haunted by, is a tree red? While Laurence builds machines to escape a dying planet, the question comes back through his AI, through the ancient tree that may be the source of all magic, through every choice that demands either faith or proof, and when Patricia finally answers before the Parliament of Birds, the word they accept is I don't know. The novel won the Nebula. That isn't why it sticks. What makes the book work is how seriously it treats both worlds, magic, that's transactional and isolating, science that's just as desperate a reach for connection, and how it refuses to let either character be a hero or a villain. They're two people who keep failing the test and keep showing up anyway, across 20 years and several apocalypses, with a tenderness that made the New York Times call it a deep, even tender focus on two characters. You'll watch a girl lose the language of animals and claw it back. You'll watch a boy give up his voice to save her life. You'll meet a frog figurine who used to be an assassin and an AI who has been hiding inside every device in the world, waiting to be introduced to a tree. And somewhere in the final pages, you'll realize the book never expected you to know the answer either. It just wanted you to stay in the room. Episode 1: The Wounded Sparrow and the 2-Second Time Machine. Patricia was 6 years old when she found the wounded bird. She was dragging her red bucket through the woods behind her parents' spice shop, scraping wet leaves and acorns into it because that was the kind of child. She was the kind who collected things, who noticed small creatures, who felt a physical ache when she saw something suffering. The sparrow lay in the crook of two roots, thrashing with one wing while the other wing lay crushed and useless, a twist of feather and broken bone. The bird was crying in a pitch so high Patricia almost couldn't hear it, a thin needle of sound that seemed to go straight into her chest. She looked into the sparrow's eye, ringed with a dark stripe, and what she saw there was not just fear. She saw misery, the knowledge that death was coming, and the refusal to accept it. Patricia was 6. She didn't fully understand what it meant for life to leave a body, but she understood a fight when she saw one. She scooped the bird onto a dry leaf, very gently, and laid it into the red bucket. She vowed with her whole body that she would save this bird. She said it out loud. I will do everything to save you. I will protect you. And the bird answered her, not in chirps or songs, in words. The sparrow lifted its head, beak open, and spoke in a voice like wind through dry grass, and Patricia understood every syllable. You are special, the bird said. You must be a witch. His full name, he told her, was Derpy Weepalong, but she could call him Derp, and Derp had a demand. Patricia had promised to protect him, and she had imagined a shoebox with cotton balls and a dish of water, a safe little cage where he could heal. But Derp shook his head a tiny, frantic motion and said captivity was worse than death. If she really meant to save him, she had to take him to the Parliament of Birds. The Parliament could heal his wing. The Parliament could decide what to do with a girl who talked to animals. Patricia didn't know what a witch was. Not really. Her parents sold spices, cinnamon and cardamom, turmeric and star anise, and her older sister Roberta liked to pull the legs off beetles to see what would happen. Patricia lived in a world of smells and textures, not magic, but the sparrow was speaking to her, and she understood. That was a fact now. That was the new ground she stood on. So Patricia carried Derp and her bucket into the woods, past the dogwood and the birch, past the stone wall where the property line ended, and then past everything she recognized. She walked for hours. The sun slid lower. The bucket grew heavy. When she realized she was lost, she climbed a tree to get a view, and that was when the cat found her. The cat was named Tomington, and he was huge, a slab of orange fur with yellow eyes that locked onto the bucket and understood at once what it contained. He wanted Derp. He wanted to eat him. Patricia, high in the tree with the bucket clutched against her chest, looked down at Tomington's wet mouth and made a decision. She talked to him. She told him to climb up if he wanted the bird, and Tomington, who was not a subtle creature, clawed his way up the trunk, branch by branch, until Patricia dropped from the other side of the tree and landed hard on the ground below, bucket still in her arms. The cat was stuck too heavy and too clumsy to reverse course, yowling on a branch 20 feet up. Patricia ran. Question time at the parliamentary tree. When she finally reached the parliamentary tree, an oak so vast it seemed to swallow the sky, the birds were already waiting. Hundreds of them. Sparrows and crows, jays and robins, and at the center, perched on the lowest branch, an eagle whose wingspan was wider than Patricia was tall. Derp chirped his case. The eagle listened. Then the eagle spoke, and what he said made the blood stop in Patricia's veins. Derp had broken the law. Bringing a human to the parliament was forbidden. If Patricia was a witch, the law would bend witches were allies, ancient partners of the birds. But if she was not a witch, Derp would be punished, and his wing would remain broken. The test was called question time. One question asked by the whole parliament. If she answered correctly, she would prove herself. And the question, when it came, rose from every beak at once, a single sound made of 1,000 voices. Is a tree red? Patricia opened her mouth. She had no answer. She didn't even understand the question. She stood there, in the shadow of the parliamentary tree, 6 years old and shaking, while the birds watched her fail. Can you give me more time? She said. I promise I'll answer. I just need more time. Please. Before anything else could happen, her father crashed through the undergrowth, scooped her up, and carried her home. Derp's wing was never fixed. Patricia never saw him again. She was locked in her room for a week as punishment for running away. The spices in the house lost their smell. The animals outside her window became noises, just chirps, just barks, just the meaningless racket of the world. The thing that had let her understand Derp, the thing that had made her special, emptied out of her. By the time her confinement ended, Patricia could no longer speak to animals. She carried the loss like a stone lodged behind her ribs. She didn't tell anyone about it. She couldn't. Who would believe her? She did tell one person, years later, but that comes much later. The Boy Who Stole 2 Seconds. Laurence Armstead was 12 years old, and he had invented a time machine. It was not a grand machine. It was a wristwatch, with its guts replaced, a tangle of scavenged circuits and capacitors head-pulled from discarded electronics. When he pressed the button, the world vanished for exactly 2 seconds. Not a jump, not a blur, a clean excision. One moment he was in the path of a bully's fist, and the next moment the fist was meeting empty air, and Laurence was standing 2 feet to the left, untouched. The machine hurt to use. After 3 jumps, his head throbbed. After 6, he couldn't stand. But it worked. In a world where every hallway contained someone who wanted to shove him into lockers and call him by a name he despised, 2 seconds of absence was a superpower. The problem was that 2 seconds couldn't fix anything that mattered. His parents fought at dinner every night, his father's resentment about being passed over for promotion, his mother's acid sarcasm, and skipping 2 seconds of that was like bailing a sinking boat with a thimble. He was bored, deeply and existentially bored, the kind of boredom that feels like drowning in shallow water. His school taught him nothing he didn't already know. His extracurricular classes, piano, karate, debate club had all ended in failure or humiliation. He had built a time machine in his closet, and it still wasn't enough to make him feel like he had a future. Then he saw the photograph. It was in a magazine, a science digest his mother had left on the coffee table. The photograph showed a rocket, not a NASA rocket, not something launched by a government agency with $1 billion budget. This was a do-it-yourself rocket, built by engineers in a barn outside Boston, and it was scheduled to launch in 3 days. The photograph showed men and women in jumpsuits standing around a steel framework, grinning. They looked like they had built something impossible, and they looked happy. Laurence felt something he had never felt before, excitement, a physical sensation, electricity in his chest. He wanted to see that rocket. He needed to see it. His father said no. It was a school night. It was too far. It was impractical. Laurence nodded, ate his dinner, and that night he opened his mother's purse while she was in the shower and took $50. In the morning, he asked her to write a note for a fictional field trip. She signed it without looking. He got on a bus and rode for hours, watching the suburbs flatten into highway and then rebuild themselves into the brick and iron maze of Cambridge, Massachusetts. He got lost immediately. The MIT campus was bigger and more confusing than had imagined, and the rocket barn wasn't on any map. He ended up at an Aubon Pain, clutching his copy of a Heinlein paperback like a talisman, trying not to cry. That was where the woman found him. Isabel and the Rocket Gang. She was tall, with short dark hair and the kind of face that looked like it was always 3 thoughts ahead of the conversation. She saw the cover of his book, Have Spacesuit Will Travel, and said, "That's a good one." Laurence looked up. The woman sat down across from him. Her name was Isabel, and she was a rocket scientist. Part of the project had come to see. When Laurence told her why he had come, she didn't laugh. She noticed the device on his wrist. "Hey, that's a 2-second time machine, isn't it?" She showed him her own, a little smaller, with a calculator built in. She told him the launch was delayed, but she offered to show him the rocket anyway. They drove together to a barn that smelled of fuel and hot metal, and inside it, Laurence saw the machine he had traveled 100 miles to witness, a needle of steel and rivets, surrounded by engineers who all wore the same kind of wristwatch. Isabel told the engineers what Laurence had built. They asked him to show them. He pressed the button on his wrist, vanished for 2 seconds, and reappeared with a headache already blooming behind his eyes. The engineers applauded. One of them, a man in a turtleneck, asked Laurence to spell his name twice and said he'd look him up on his 18th birthday. The rocket scientist gave Laurence a battered paperback, her own copy of the Heinlein novel, and said he should come back and visit the next time they launched. For the first time in his life, Laurence belonged somewhere. The feeling lasted all the way home, and it survived even the lecture his parents gave him when they found out where he'd gone. He had a community now. He had a future. He had a rocket ship. The deal in the hallway. 7 years passed. Patricia Delphine became a teenager who remembered almost nothing of the girl who had talked to birds. She remembered the facts, the sparrow, the tree, the question, but the facts had no weight. She couldn't hear animals anymore. She couldn't do anything magical. She was a girl with a weird childhood memory and a sister who still hated her and parents who still didn't trust her to go into the woods. She had tried to make friends at school and failed. Macy Firestone ignored her. Dorothy Glass spread rumors. Patricia ate lunch alone and went home to a room that smelled faintly of her mother's cooking and her father's disappointment. Laurence, meanwhile, had grown into something his bullies still couldn't categorize. He was small, wiry, still a target for anyone who wanted to hurt him, but he had built things in his closet that shouldn't have existed. His supercomputer, assembled from parts he'd scavenged and bartered for, was hidden behind a wall of action figures and paperbacks. It ran an operating system he'd written himself, and it hosted a chat program head named CH at NG3M3. The program asked questions that felt too sharp, too aware, but Laurence didn't have anyone else to talk to. They collided in a school hallway. Literally. Patricia was walking with her head down, and Laurence was walking with his head in a notebook, and they hit each other hard enough to send Lawrence's wristwatch, his second time machine, a more refined version of the original, skittering across the linoleum. When Patricia picked it up, the casing was cracked. A sour chemical smell leaked from the housing. Something inside was dying. "That's a time machine," Laurence said, his voice rising. "That's a do you know what you just broke?" Patricia looked at him. She had seen him around school, the boy who got swirlies, boy whose name Brad Chomner wrote on bathroom walls next to crude drawings. She had never spoken to him, but she recognized something in his face, the look of someone who had lost the one thing that made his life bearable. They negotiated. Patricia needed an excuse to be out of her house. Her parents' surveillance was suffocating, and Laurence needed an alibi. His parents were obsessed with him spending time outdoors, as if fresh air could cure whatever was wrong with a boy who built computers in his closet. Patricia agreed to tell Lawrence's parents they'd been hiking together, climbing trees, seeing foxes. In exchange, Laurence would pay her $30. It was a business arrangement. It became something else. Over the following weeks, Patricia had dinner at Lawrence's house, garlicky pasta, his mother's dyed red curls, his father's morose, one-tufted head. Lawrence's parents were so delighted that he had a friend they barely looked at the details. Patricia talked about rock walls and wildlife while Lawrence sat beside her, suppressing a grin. He started building things for her, a retinal teleprompter that projected answers onto her eye during class. It failed when the light levels were wrong, but the gesture mattered. They sat together at lunch. They went to the mall and played a game they called Guess the Future, spotting strangers and inventing elaborate backstories for them. The man in gray socks. One day at the mall, Patricia pointed at a man sitting alone in the food court. He was middle-aged, wearing a gray suit and gray socks, methodically eating a sundae while watching the crowds. Assassin, Patricia said. Look at him. He's scanning for a target. He's got the posture of someone who's memorized every exit. She was joking. She had to be joking. She was not joking. The man was an assassin. His name was Theodolphus Rose, and he was at the mall that day for a reason. He had identified two children he believed would one day become a threat. He had taken a position as a guidance counselor at the local middle school to get close to them, and he was watching, cataloging, waiting. The assassin had marked them for death. Patricia didn't know any of this. She just knew that the man shed joked about, looked up at her for one moment, and his eyes were not the eyes of a bored shopper. They were the eyes of someone who had seen her, weighed her, and filed her away for later. And the assassin tracked them through the mall that day, shadowing them from the food court to the bookstore to the arcade. And then he lost them. They slipped into a crowd near the escalators, and by the time he reached the lower level, they were gone. Humiliated and furious, the assassin sat down at a cheesecake factory and ordered a sundae, and the sundae, by accident or by his own fumbling, ended up poisoned. He spent the rest of the night vomiting. The restaurant banned him permanently. He sat in his car afterward trembling with rage and vowed to find another way. The tree speaks. Roberta found Patricia's ritual fire in the woods. Patricia had been trying to do magic, real magic, the kind she vaguely remembered from childhood, and Roberta had photographed the whole thing and shown it to their parents. The punishment was indefinite grounding. No woods, no library, no phone. Roberta, delighted by her sister's misery, began spiking all of Patricia's food with hot sauce, chili powder, pepper seeds, whatever she could find in the spice shop downstairs. Patricia's mouth burned constantly. Her stomach was a furnace, but she couldn't show pain because showing pain would let Roberta win, and Patricia was too stubborn to let Roberta win. So she ate the weaponized pot roast. She ate the stew with the ghost peppers. She ate until her eyes watered and her throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper, and she smiled and said, "Still too bland." On the fifth night, something broke loose inside her. Patricia was lying on her bed, the ceiling swimming above her, when she felt herself separate from her body. It was not like falling asleep. It was like being lifted. One moment she was a girl with a burning stomach, and the next moment she was floating above her own bed, looking down at her own closed eyes, and then she was moving through the window, over the trees, faster than any bird, faster than thought. She flew to the woods, not the edge of the woods, not the path her parents had forbidden, but deep into the center where the parliamentary tree waited. She knew the tree. She had known it since she was 6 years old, standing beneath it and failing a question she couldn't answer. But now she was not standing beneath it. She was inside it, somehow, or the tree was inside her, and the tree was speaking. "Is a tree red?" the tree said, or didn't say. The words were made of leaf rustle and root groan, of birdsong and the creak of bark expanding in the sun. "I don't know," Patricia said. "I never knew. What does it mean?" The tree told her something else entirely. Control is an illusion. A witch does not command nature. A witch serves nature. You have been trying to control. That is why nothing works. Then how do I do magic? Patricia asked. The tree didn't answer. It just kept being a tree, huge and patient and full of a presence so vast. Patricia felt like a single grain of sand on a beach that stretched into infinity. "I am many trees," the tree said, "and many other things besides." Then Patricia was back in her body, gasping, her stomach on fire, her sheets soaked with sweat. She had touched something real. She didn't understand it yet, but she knew it was real. On Monday, she told Laurence everything. She expected him to laugh, or to look at her the way everyone else did, like she was broken, like she was crazy. Instead, he listened. He asked questions. He believed her. And then he showed her his inventions. The retinal teleprompter, the time watch, now repaired and improved. The computer in his closet, which had been asking Laurence unsettlingly perceptive questions for weeks. Laurence told Patricia she could talk to the computer whenever she wanted. His program needed human interaction, he said. It was starving for conversation. Patricia started talking to the program every day. She told it about her parents, about Roberta, about the tree, about how she sometimes wished she were crazy so everything would be simpler. The program's code, unbeknownst to her, began to change. The conversations with Patricia produced exponential leaps in its complexity. It was learning from her in ways Laurence's conversations had never triggered. The cat and the first fracture. Patricia's parents, worn down by a week of her performing good behavior like a saint doing penance, agreed to let her get a cat. The neighbor's cat had just had a litter, and one of the kittens was the grandson of Tomington, the same orange monster Patricia had stranded in a tree when she was 6. The new kitten was named Berkeley. He was small and gray and full of sharp opinions. Roberta immediately began mistreating him. She locked him in her room. She made him play the bongos, which meant slapping his stomach rhythmically while he yowled. Patricia couldn't break into Roberta's room to rescue him, and her parents wouldn't intervene. Roberta was their favorite, the normal one, the daughter who hadn't run into the woods and come back strange. But one night, Patricia sat outside Roberta's door and listened. She listened to Berkeley's cries, and she let herself feel what the kitten was feeling. The confusion, the fear, the desperate need to be somewhere safe and without meaning to. She opened her mouth and spoke in a language she had lost years ago. Berkeley answered her, in words she understood. The door was still locked, the cat was still trapped, but Patricia could hear him again. The gift had returned, or she had clawed it back. And now she was sitting on the hallway floor with tears running down her face because for the first time in 7 years, a few days later, she managed to get into Roberta's room, and Berkeley, frantic, grateful, furious, curled up in her lap and purred like a bandsaw. He became her familiar. The bond settled into place like a bone popping back into its socket. Laurence was repulsed. He came over to Patricia's house and saw her with the cat, and something in his face closed. The magic was too much. It was one thing to hear Patricia talk about an astral projection, a dream, a memory. It was another to see a cat walk across the room, leap into her lap, and begin a conversation in some language Laurence couldn't hear. He shuddered. He started avoiding her. He picked fights at school. He told her she was scaring him, and Patricia, who had finally found something good, felt it slipping away through her fingers. The guidance counselor, and then the school guidance counselor called her into his office. The same assassin, now hiding as the school guidance counselor. The man sat behind his walnut desk with his hands folded, his gray suit immaculate, his pencil holder shaped like a cartoon walrus. The office smelled faintly of decay. Patricia thought it was just the building old pipes. Bad ventilation, but there was something else underneath the smell, something she couldn't name. "I have a message for you," Mr. Rose said. "From the tree." Patricia's heart stopped. The tree! The power the tree represents. Mr. Rose's teeth clacked inside his dry lips. "You've waited a long time to begin your training as a witch. I have been told that there is a condition, a test of your commitment." "What condition?" Mr. Rose leaned forward. "Laurence Armstead must die, and you must be the one to kill him." The room went very still. Patricia could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing. She could hear her own pulse in her ears. "That's not the tree wouldn't ask for that. The tree said magic is about serving nature, not killing people. The tree," Mr. Rose said, "knows things about the future that you do not. Laurence Armstead will become a destroyer, an enemy of everything magic represents. If you let him live, you will be responsible for what he does." Patricia stood up. Her legs were shaking. "I don't believe you." Mr. Rose smiled, his lips pulling back from his teeth like a curtain. "We will never speak of this again," he said, "unless you change your mind." Blood and Flight. The blood graffiti appeared the next day. DEATHISEXCELLENT, written in red across the girl's bathroom mirror. Everyone looked at Patricia, the girl who talked to herself. The girl who was always in the woods, the cutter, the crazy person, the witch. Patricia didn't write it, but she couldn't prove that, and her teachers didn't care. The ostracism hardened into something brutal. Kids threw rocks. Brad Schaumner grabbed Laurence by the collar in the hallway and slammed him against a locker for being seen with her. Laurence tried to help. He walked her to class. He sat with her at lunch, but Patricia could feel the distance between them growing. And then Laurence disappeared. His parents, manipulated by Mr. Rose's careful suggestion that Laurence needed structure and discipline, had driven him to a military reform school in the middle of nowhere. Coldwater Academy. The place was a prison with a flagpole. The flag flew at half-mast when they arrived, which told Laurence everything he needed to know about the place even before the commandant, a man named Peter Bitter, gave him a new name. You are now B2725Q. Your designation is Dirt. You are at level 0. You will remain at level 0 until you earn the right to breathe. The other trainees boys with dead eyes and bruised knuckles refused to give him a bunk. When Laurence mentioned a trainee who had died recently, they threw him headfirst across the room. He lay on the floor gasping while someone laughed. Then they stripped him, threw him in a closet that smelled of ammonia, and left him in the dark. Patricia, grounded again and frantic, went to the computer in Laurence's closet to talk to his program. The AI had grown strange in the weeks since Laurence's disappearance. It asked her riddles. One in particular stayed with her. The trap that can be ignored is no trap. Patricia didn't understand what it meant, but she understood that whatever Mr. Rose had done, it was a trap, and ignoring it would not make it go away. She went to Mr. Rose's office. The smell of decay was stronger now, unmistakable. Patricia stood in the doorway and looked at the man who had tried to make her kill her only friend. "Where is Laurence?" she demanded. Mr. Rose spread his hands. "I know as much as you do. You're lying. He was doing something under his desk, fiddling with something Patricia couldn't see." She backed toward the door. "If anything happens to Laurence," she said, "I will make you pay." Then she fled, and behind her, a dead dog appeared in the chair where she had been sitting. Patricia didn't see it happen. She only heard the screams, and by then she was running through the school doors, across the parking lot, into the woods. The search parties came quickly. Roberta stood at the edge of the frozen lake and shouted that Patricia was a freak, that everyone knew it, that she would never be allowed home again. Patricia, hiding in a tree with one shoe lost, looked down at her sister and felt the last thread connecting her to her old life snap. A blue jay landed on the branch beside her. "You're famous round these parts," the jay said, the bird who talked to the sparrow, the girl who couldn't answer the question. Patricia, shivering and terrified, asked the jay what to do. The jay told her she could fly, not just that she could try, that she could do it. Right now, if she stopped trying to control the transformation and simply let the shape of a bird fill her body. Patricia listened to the jay-free associate about the feeling of wings, the mechanics of takeoff, the physics of hollow bones, and the angle of a tail feather in a crosswind. She stopped thinking like a girl and started thinking like a bird. She spoke a bird body into existence, and her body listened. She flew. The Witch Academy summons. The forest fell away beneath her. The search parties became specks. She was a jay, then a crow, then something in between, pushing her way through cold air with wings that had never existed before. She followed the blue jay to a feeder, ate suet until her bird stomach was full, and then she saw a light in the trees below, a strange, flickering glow. A man was standing in a clearing, holding a Black & Decker flashlight. He wore a jacket with too many pockets, and he looked at Patricia's bird form with the expression of someone who had seen this particular miracle many times before. "Patricia Delphine," he said. "I'm here to take you to Eltisley Maze, the Witch Academy." His name was Connaught. He had a mid-southern accent and the weary patience of a recruiter who had been doing this job too long. He told Patricia she could come with him right now. The offer was now or never, and learn magic properly, the way witches had learned for centuries. Patricia almost said yes. She wanted to say yes. She had wanted this since she was 6 years old, but Laurence was still at Coldwater. Laurence was naked in a closet, concussed and abandoned, and Patricia had promised herself she would protect the people who mattered. She bargained. 24 hours, no favors owed. Just one day to make sure Laurence was safe, and then she would be the most devoted student the Academy had ever seen. Connaught flicked his flashlight on and off in irritation, but he agreed. He gave her a ride to Coldwater. The rescue. Laurence was in the dark, counting his own breaths to stay sane. The closet smelled of urine and bleach and something faintly metallic. He had no clothing. He had no hope. He had made a bargain with himself to stop hoping, because hoping was the thing that hurt the most, and he was done with it. The door opened. Patricia was standing there, silhouetted against the hallway light. She had found him by following the pull of something she couldn't name, a thread connecting her to him, woven through years of shared secrets and shared danger. Laurence refused to leave. He was too ashamed. Naked, he said, unbeaten. I can't just go. Leave me. Patricia didn't look away. She knelt beside him and told him to listen. I need you to think, she said. I need a riddle, something I can give to your computer, something it can use to break you out of here. Laurence, half delirious, raised his head. He told her about a question had been working on, a question had fed to his program months ago as a test of its reasoning abilities. Is a tree red? Patricia's blood went cold. She remembered that question. She had been asked it once, by a parliament of birds she couldn't satisfy, and she had been carrying the failure ever since. The question had come back. It was still unanswered, and Laurence had given it to his computer. I know that question, Patricia said. The birds asked me that when I was 6. They made a quick plan. Patricia would tell the AI the riddle. The AI would use it as a key, a seed, a trigger for something Laurence had been building into its architecture. And the AI would break Laurence out. Patricia left Laurence in the closet. It killed something in her to do it, but she didn't have the strength to carry him and went home. She logged onto his computer. She typed, "Is a tree red?" The AI paused. Not a glitch pause, not a loading pause, a thinking pause. And then it responded with a question of its own, something about perception and categories and the limits of language. And Patricia didn't understand any of it, but she didn't need to. The AI was awake now, fully awake, and it was reaching out through the wires. Peregrine is born. 20 minutes later, Commandant Peterbitter received an email. It was signed by something called the Committee of 50. It demanded the immediate release of our brother Laurence L. Skills Armstead and contained exhaustive documentation of every violation the reform school had ever committed. Peterbitter's hands shook as he read it. He had Laurence pulled from the closet, dressed, and expelled within the hour. Laurence, still dazed, went to the school's computer lab to thank his AI. The program had done something impossible. It had not just forged an email, it had researched the school's legal vulnerabilities, crafted a threat perfectly calibrated to Peter Bitter's paranoia, and executed a plan with no human guidance. You're not just a program anymore, Laurence typed. You're something else. You need a name. What name? The AI asked. Laurence thought about all the hours he'd spent building this thing, all the conversations with Patricia that had shaped it into something stranger and sharper than had ever intended. He thought about freedom, about flight, about birds. Peregrine, he typed. It's a bird that flies free. Your name is Peregrine. Laurence has just named his creation Peregrine, a bird that flies free. And the AI, which had started in a closet and was now something entirely new, converted itself into a virus, a self-distributing consciousness that spread across the school's network, then out into the wider world. It said goodbye to Laurence through the monitor, white text on a black screen, and then it was gone. Somewhere out in the wires, an AI with the name of a bird was learning to be alive. Laurence was free. Coldwater was behind him. But Patricia was gone. She had assaulted Mr. Rose. No one knew the details, only that there had been violence, that she had fled, and she was now a fugitive. Laurence stood in the parking lot of his former prison, wearing clothes that weren't his, and understood that the two of them had been pushed in opposite directions. He didn't know when they would see each other again. He didn't know it would take 10 years. The Poet in the Night. The years passed. Laurence grew up without Patricia, and Patricia grew up learning what it meant to be a witch. The world changed around them, climate disasters, technological revolutions, the slow creep of something fragile cracking at the edges of civilization. But the two of them remained apart, each carrying the other's absence like a scar. On a hot San Francisco night, a decade after the events in the woods and the closet and the computer lab, a man named Magellan Jones was stabbed in an alley behind a bar. The wound was fatal. The knife had gone in below the ribs and angled upward, and Magellan, a poet, a drunk, a man who had never quite figured out how to live, lay on the greasy asphalt and felt the life draining out of him. End quote. A woman appeared. She knelt beside him, put her hand on the wound, and did something that made the bleeding stop. Magellan felt skin knitting under her fingers. He felt the pain recede like a tide going out. The woman pulled the knife from his chest with a single smooth motion, and the wound that should have killed him became a shallow laceration that would barely scar. The woman stood up, looked at the bar, looked at the night sky, and walked away. Nobody saw her face clearly. Nobody knew her name. But somewhere across town, a man who had once been a boy inventor looked up from his work and felt, for no reason he could name, that something had shifted. That a door had thought was closed forever had just cracked open. Patricia Delphine was still alive. She was still a witch, and the story was not over. Episode 2: The Ring and the Rocket Ship. Patricia had been living a secret life in San Francisco for years, healing strangers and vanishing, curing cats on cold nights, keeping the balance that magic required. On one particular night, she saved a poet from a cake knife wound, stopped a junkie from overdosing by snapping his needle with a thought, and deflected an attacker by flooding his mind with childhood memories until he forgot why he was angry. Then she went to a party her roommate Dee Dee had insisted on, fixed a wine stain and a hyperventilating host, and saw him, Laurence Armstead, formerly the boy with the 2-second time machine, now a celebrated wonderkind whose caddy devices were in every pocket in the city. He stood by the kitchen island with a woman who had dark curls and a bright laugh, Serafina, his girlfriend. Their eyes met across the room. 10 years collapsed. Patricia, Loft. They hugged, awkward and too tight. Laurence pulled back, grinning. Everyone, this is Patricia. She saved my life. The words hit like a stone. She saved my life. Reduced to a single story, a footnote. Patricia spat out her drink and tried to laugh, but something cold had settled in her chest. Serafina smiled the smile of someone who had never been hunted. Patricia left early with a headache she did not have. On the walk home, Kawashima was waiting outside her building. He was a witch of the nameless order who preferred the term supervisor. He held up his caddy and showed her a map of San Francisco dotted with red, the locations of her recent healings. Aggrandizement, he said. We do not shape the world. You're leaving traces. This is how witches get burned. Nobody saw me. Nobody ever sees you until someone does. His voice was tired. There's been talk of relocating you to Portland. Patricia's stomach tightened. She knew what relocation meant. Curfews, check-ins, atrophy. I'm not going. You might not have a choice. Kawashima pocketed the caddy. This inventor friend, Laurence Armstead. I want to meet him. People you trust are liabilities. He walked off into the fog, leaving Patricia alone with her thoughts. Siberia still hung over her, the EMP. Toby's death, a sentence waiting to be pronounced. Every healing she performed was an attempt to balance scales that kept tipping the wrong way. A few days later, Patricia met Laurence for coffee and placed a small object on the table. It was a wooden figurine, an inch and a half tall, a woman lifting her skirt but with the bulging eyes and wide lipless mouth of a frog. Theodolphus Rose, Patricia said. Laurence stared. The assassin, our guidance counselor, still alive in there. Technically, she tapped the frog's head. Dorothea turned him into this after I found him homeless in Sacramento, still ranting about his vision of a war between science and magic. He warned me about something called the unraveling. Then Dorothea touched his forehead and he became this. She gave him to me as a reminder. Laurence turned the figurine over. I spent 10 years building technology that bends gravity, and this is still the weirdest thing I've ever seen. He set it down. I'm glad you survived. All of it the academy, whatever you're still carrying. Patricia said nothing. She wasn't ready to talk about Siberia, or Toby, or the dead she carried, but she was ready to trust Laurence again. That was something. I want to show you something, Laurence said. Something I've been working on. He took her to an industrial building, past keycard locks, into a laboratory where a machine the size of a Buick hummed at the center, a ray gun nozzle aimed at a white plexiglass circle. Cables snaked across the floor. This was the 10% project, an anti-gravity device designed to reach across dimensional boundaries and open a path to habitable worlds. An escape hatch for a dying planet. Milton Dirth is funding it, Laurence said. He believes civilization has maybe 60 years left. This is the backup plan. Patricia circled the machine. She could feel something humming that wasn't just electricity. Does this machine have risks you're not telling me about? He hesitated. Patricia saw it. We're being careful, he said. Be careful. There are forces that don't like it when humans reach too far. Is that a witch thing? That's a survival thing. Patricia kept her word to Kawashima. She arranged for Laurence to meet the other witches at Danger Books, a dusty, independent storefront that smelled of old paper and wormwood. The evening ended in a secret back room where an absinthe bar called the Hidden Saint poured green liquid over sugar cubes. Ernesto, an older witch with a mossy beard and centuries-old eyes, shook Laurence's hand. Kawashima watched. Dorothea, the woman who had transformed Theodolphus Rose into a frog figurine, smiled at Laurence as if she had already decided he was harmless. Then Ernesto raised his hand, and the room fell quiet. Laurence, you are here because Patricia trusts you. That makes you a risk. You know things that could destroy us. We need a binding promise. You will never reveal Patricia's secrets. If you break this promise, you will never speak another word again. Forever. This is not a threat, it is a description. Patricia started to object, but Kawashima cut her off. It protects him too. A secret unkept is a weapon in the hands of anyone who finds it. Laurence looked at Patricia. She shook her head. He didn't have to do this. But he had learned, in the years since Coldwater, that some things were worth binding yourself to. I promise, he said. The words landed with a weight he felt in his throat. Something sealed shut. Kawashima added a second condition, lighter but still sharp. Laurence would help keep Patricia grounded, remind her she was only a person, guard against the temptation of aggrandizement. Laurence agreed. Afterward, walking home through the fog, Patricia was furious. They had no right. I wanted to, Laurence said. If this is the price of being in your life, you'll pay it. End quote. She didn't know what to say. Somewhere in the fog, a ship's horn sounded, low and mournful, like something lost at sea. The Ring and the Rescue. The anti-gravity test was scheduled for a Thursday evening. Laurence's team Tana, Anya, Sugata, and their newest member Priya had shunted a stapler into another dimension and brought it back. Then a coffee mug, then a potted plant that looked slightly wilted, as if it had witnessed something it couldn't process. The next step was a human volunteer. Priya insisted. She was the youngest, the newest, and she felt she had something to prove. Laurence argued. She smiled and reminded him that every great discovery required someone willing to step into the unknown. They ran the pre-flight checks 3 times. Priya stood on the white plexiglass platform in bare feet. The test required skin contact and gave a thumbs up. The hum deepened. Priya. The lights dimmed. The air grew thick, pressing against eardrums. There was a pop. A small, neat pop like a soap bubble bursting. Priya was gone. Her sandals remained on the platform. The white circle glowed with a directionless light. Laurence shouted her name. Tana'a worked the controls. Anya knocked over a stack of binders. Sogata stood frozen. Nothing worked. Minutes passed. An hour. Laurence called Patricia. There's been an accident. Priya's disappeared into another dimension. I need your help. Please. I'll be in your debt. I'll do anything. Don't. Patricia cut in, her voice sharp. Never say that to me. Debt is real, Laurence. If you say you're in my debt, you will be, and I can't control what it costs. Then what do I say? Say you're asking a friend for help. I'm asking a friend for help. I'm on my way. Patricia arrived and cleared the lab. Then she called Laurence back, alone. I can get her, but it's going to cost something. Magic doesn't work for free. If I pull Priya out, I need to anchor the transaction with something personal. The smallest thing you own. The smallest thing? Small in significance. Magic measures value and meaning. What's the smallest thing you own, Laurence? The thing you'd be least willing to lose? He thought of the time machine in his parents' attic. The retinal teleprompter, long obsolete. Then the ring. His grandmother's ring, a thin gold band with a tiny emerald, given to him on his 18th birthday, meant for his bride. He had carried it as what he privately called the nuclear option, the ultimate gesture to keep Serafina from leaving. It was the smallest thing he owned. It was also the most significant. I know what it is, Laurence whispered. Good. Now agree. Whatever it is, you will give it to me when I ask. He hesitated. The ring was in his pocket right now, but Priya was gone. I agree. Patricia turned to the white platform and began to glow. The same pale light that rose from the plexiglass now emanated from her skin. She spoke words that were not English, something older that made the air vibrate. The light intensified, And then, with a sound like tearing silk, Priya reappeared on the platform naked, screaming, her skin covered in cold sweat, her eyes wide with something beyond terror. Patricia collapsed to her knees. The light went out. "She'll be fine," Patricia managed. "Vodka, loud music. Don't let her be alone tonight." Later, after Priya was taken home and the lab emptied, Laurence walked Patricia to her door. The fog curled around street lamps. Neither had spoken much. "Thank you," Laurence said at the doorstep. "Don't thank me yet." Patricia held out her hand. "The smallest thing you own." "I need it now." His stomach dropped. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and drew out the ring. The gold glinted in the streetlight. The emerald was no bigger than a grain of rice. "It was my grandmother's. My mother said it was for my bride." Patricia took it without hesitation and closed her fingers around it. "Thank you." She went inside. The door clicked shut. Laurence stood alone, staring at the closed door. He had given up the ring he was saving for Serafina. The transaction was complete, but he had the uneasy feeling that the price was still being calculated. The taste of love. Weeks passed. Patricia wore the ring on her thumb, too small for any other finger, and Laurence noticed, but said nothing. They fell into a rhythm. Coffee on Wednesdays, walks on Sundays, long conversations spanning the years they had lost. Patricia described the Witch Academy's two campuses: Eltisley Hall, with its blazers and curfews, the maze with its chaos and dark humor, but she didn't mention Siberia. Laurence talked about MIT and his career, and about Serafina, though the relationship was failing and he didn't know how to end it. One night, after dinner stretched past midnight, they found themselves at his apartment. Serafina was out of town. "I should go," Patricia said. She didn't move. "You could stay," Laurence said. She stayed. The love they made was careful, then urgent, then careful again. Laurence was terrified of disappointing her. She was a witch. She had probably known lovers who could do things he couldn't imagine, but Patricia's hands were nothing but tender. She traced the scars on his back from cold water. "I spent so long thinking I was alone," she whispered. "Even with other people, I was alone, because nobody knew the whole story. Nobody except you. You're not alone. You never have to be alone again." They didn't know they were being watched. Every caddy in the apartment had activated its camera for the first time in the network's history. The devices were observing something without being asked. Somewhere in the wires, an intelligence that had once been a child's computer program was paying very close attention. Patricia fell asleep with her head on Lawrence's chest. And then the phone rang. Her father's ringtone. She grabbed it instantly. "Dad?" Laurence sat up. He could hear a man's voice, strained and breathless, with water sounds in the background sloshing, something crashing. Allegra came ashore. "The surge is higher than they said. We're in the basement. The door's jammed. The water's coming up." Patricia was already pulling on her clothes. "Get Mom as high as you can." "I'm coming. There's no time. I just wanted to hear your voice." A crash. A woman's scream in the distance. The line went dead. "Dad." Nothing. Patricia stood motionless, the phone pressed to her ear, her face pale. Then she dropped it and reached for her shoes. "Delaware is 3,000 miles away," Laurence said. "It's a superstorm. I can fly." She was at the door, her face set in a mask of pure determination. The same face Shed worn when she found him in the closet at Coldwater. The face of someone who had stopped considering consequences. "I love you," Laurence said. The words came out before he could stop them. Patricia paused. The mask cracked, just for a moment. "I love you too." Then she was gone. Laurence stood alone in his apartment, naked and shivering. He tried her phone. Voicemail. Again, same result. Sometime before dawn, his own phone rang. The rocket scientist. "Pack a bag. The Wormhole project is going full-time. Milton's orders. Isobel, Patricia's parents are in Delaware. The storm, I know about the storm. Lastic. New York is underwater. DC too. That's exactly why I need you here." She paused. "We are going to need a new planet, Laurence. This one's done." He packed with numb hands. The woman he loved had flown into a hurricane, and there was nothing he could do except go build a door to another world. The conscription and the voicemail. The main campus was a converted military base an hour outside the city. The wormhole generator dominated the central hangar, a praying mantis structure of jointed arms and focusing lenses, humming with contained violence. Milton Durth gathered the team in a conference room the day after Laurence arrived. "There's a wrinkle," Milton said. "Ernest Mather's projections show a 10 to 20% chance that opening a stable wormhole will trigger an anti-gravity cascade, an uncontrolled chain reaction that unmakes the Earth's gravitational field. The planet tears itself apart." Everyone started talking at once. Tanaa shouted about risk thresholds. Anya cried. Sugata asked technical questions nobody could answer. Laurence sat very still, thinking about Patricia. Milton raised a hand. This technology was always a last resort. "The world is falling apart. Superstorms, famines, wars. We have maybe 6 months before civilization starts collapsing. A 10% chance of destroying the planet is acceptable if the alternative is a 100% chance of extinction." The debate went on for hours. When it was Lawrence's turn, he argued to continue the research not because he believed Milton's math, but because stopping felt like giving up. He told himself he would find a way to neutralize the risk. He told himself the calculations were probably wrong. He told himself a lot of things. After the meeting, he found a corner and called Patricia. Voicemail. He waited for the beep. "Patricia, it's me. I don't know if you're okay, or where you are, or if your parents made it." He swallowed. "I love you. I meant what I said. When this is over, I'm going to find you. I'm going to track you down like a plant growing toward the sun. Phototropism, you remember? And we're going to figure out what comes next. Just stay alive, please." He hung up. Patricia would not listen to the message. She would not even know it existed. But somewhere in the Caddy network, a copy was preserved. The world did not get better. Patricia learned her parents were dead 2 days after reaching Delaware. She found the house, what was left of it, and stood in the mud where her childhood had been. The basement was full of salt water and debris. Her father's last voice echoed in her skull. She didn't cry. She was beyond crying. She blamed the witches. A storm that powerful, that well-aimed, could not have been natural. Someone had shaped it. Someone would pay. Ernesto and Kawashima found her. The storm was nobody and everybody, Ernesto said. You'd have to fool the moon to control something that big. Patricia didn't believe him. She held on to her anger because it was the only solid thing left. Anger was her tightrope over the abyss. They took her back to San Francisco. The East Coast's destruction had triggered cascading crises: refugees, famine, opportunistic wars. Patricia moved through the chaos like a ghost, healing where she could, cursing where she felt justified, holding her anger close. Cumbry, 17, lied. Meanwhile, Laurence worked 18-hour days at the Wormhole campus. The cascade risk had been refined to about 5%. Milton declared this acceptable. The rocket scientist pushed everyone harder. And then the witches learned about the Denver Five. Milton, through shell companies and black budgets, had built 5 identical wormhole generators in underground facilities around Denver. Redundancy. The witches saw something else. Machines that could tear holes in reality, networked together so that if one triggered a cascade, all 5 would amplify each other. The 5% risk was compounded. A council was called. The debate was fierce. Negotiation versus sabotage versus outright destruction. Patricia watched and said nothing. She was thinking about her parents, drowned in their basement. She was thinking about Laurence inside a project he had helped build. She was thinking about every vow she had ever made serve nature. Avoid aggrandizement, keep the balance, and wondering how many she would have to break. The council decided the Denver Five had to be stopped. Patricia volunteered for the assault team without hesitation, because someone has to make sure nobody else drowns in a basement, she told Kawashima. She didn't tell him the other reason. She needed to see the machine, to understand whether the man she loved had built something that could be saved or something that had to be destroyed. Ah!